Do you genuinely believe any marriage can be saved?
I don't. And that is not what I try to do.
Good.
There are lots of toxic relationships and toxic people in relationships that just make it impossible to get beyond it. So I've always said, I'm not going to make anybody stay married. That is never my desire. I do believe that if you want to, that it's important to put in the effort so you don't have regrets going forward. I kept seeing people who, you know, they weren't sure about the marriage, and then after they left, they came back and went, "Man, I wish I had tried." And that is just such a painful place to be.
That's horrible.
Yeah, and
You're
so
supposed to do
I think
everything you can and then at least walk away with full peace.
exactly. Yeah, and I think a lot of times people get to be in so much pain that they see divorce as the exit of the pain, not just the exit of the relationship. And then they divorce and the pain doesn't go away. You know, they realize it's associated with patterns, and they still have, if there are kids involved, they still have this person in their life that they haven't solved the issues with. So my bigger thing is, can somebody A, save their relationship and make it healthy, B, restore and move through those issues so they can actually successfully co-parent, and C, at a bare minimum, be able to, at the end of the process, say, I feel good about what I tried to do and I'm ready to move on.
I think it's really interesting because when I got divorced, all my friends suddenly wanted to tell me what was wrong with their marriage. Oh, and I realized they were looking for some sort of permission. Also, they saw that I was very happy divorced, and I still am. What I figured out, however, was I had to tell them two things. Number one, divorce doesn't mean you get away from this person's dysfunction. If you have children, and
Yeah.
they can make it much worse, you don't even know about post-separation abuse and all that kind of thing. Number two, now I know 5 years out, divorce isn't really worth it just in the leaving. It's worth it in the growing if you're willing to do it, because you do have to become a better person, a better parent, a better co-parent, all those types of things. And it takes years to figure it all out. So I'm not a fan of leaving marriages. I am a person who is not a fan of divorce. I am a person who understands if you don't have a marriage, you need a divorce. But if
Yeah.
you have a marriage, I'll be the first one to tell you, yeah, that sounds awful. You know, sounds to me like you have an annoying husband. Sounds to me like you need a good therapist. Sorry to break it to you.
Yeah.
You know? Dr. Lee Baucom is the creator of the program called Save the Marriage. He has over 3 decades of experience helping couples as well as individuals learn how to thrive both inside and outside of their marriages. He's trained as both a therapist and a life coach and does a lot of public speaking. He's written books including Thrive Principles, How to Save Your Marriage in 3 Simple Steps, and Recovering from the Affair. He doesn't believe that every marriage is worth saving, but he does believe that when it is worth saving, it takes two. So, what can you do if you're the only one doing the work?
I do believe that people who work on marriages need to have a pro-marriage kind of framework to see what's possible, to be willing to stretch into that. A lot of times I've watched therapists who try to be neutral, and I don't think there really is such a thing in human nature to be neutral, but they try to hide any preconceived notion they might have. It still leaks out. And what they often end up doing is defaulting to the person who says, I just don't see a way. And they go, okay, well, there's no way. Instead of, so my analogy is always, you know, if I've got my arm is, you know, at a right angle and I go to the doctor and they're like, well, yeah, it's broken. So what do you want to do about that? You know, I want them to be going, hey, let's fix that. Let's get you functional again. And then if that can't happen, okay, what do we do next? You know, what's the next step? And so that was one of my kind of breaks with the therapy world is sometimes you have to say, hey, let's see what can happen. And if we can't get there, let's see how we bring some closure that's healthy. Let's see how we solve these issues going forward so that you're not encumbered in the next relationship and in if you're co-parenting. And that to me was more of a framework that I just didn't see reflected in coaching or in therapy.
I imagine it's very satisfying work, but I also imagine it's really stressful because you're dealing with people who can't get out of their own way, like human adults, you know. So,
So again, the human experience, whatever you're doing working with humans, you're going to have that reality of, do you not see how you're tripping yourself up? You know, do you not see how you're inflicting this upon yourself? But to step back. So I knew pretty early on in college that I wanted to do something helping people. I went to college thinking I was going into the business school and pretty quickly went, okay, that's not really it. And so I took a lot of that framework in with me. But I understood that one of the things people kept coming to me is with their personal issues. Like I could hear them and maybe help clarify. And so I decided I would go into therapy. And at that point, I wasn't clear about what that would look like. I did training as an individual therapist and as a marriage and family therapist, both. My program allowed for both. And so I kind of went in the direction of the systems thinking about who a person is in the world and in relationships, how they fit as a piece into that, and how even our psychology fits into that piece, and decided to specialize in working with couples. Looking back, part of that was watching the pain that happened in my own extended family. My parents, still in their mid-80s, are happily married. My grandparents were married and happily married until one died. But I had others in my family, like an uncle who 6 or 7 marriages were not really sure, because there was one that we're like, were they married? Were they not? But he was not successful. Yeah. Until the end. His last marriage did last. And then I had an aunt who was married 3 times and another who had unsuccessful relationship after unsuccessful relationship. And I watched what happened on multi-generations. I watched the pain of my grandparents watching as their kids struggled. I watched my parents struggle with their siblings hurting. I watched my aunts and uncle struggling. I watched my cousins struggling. Some of them I don't even have contact with. They're so split off from the family. And I went, the whole breakup of marriages is just multi-generational.
And it has such it's like an atom bomb. It has wide-ranging repercussions.
Yeah.
There's so much to it that people don't really think about. They think it's 2 people. Then they think it's 2 plus the kids. It's actually everyone.
Yeah. Well, and I recognize human nature. If you hit your thumb, you're nailing something, you hit your thumb, that pain becomes the only focus of your attention. Nothing else is out there. And all you want is to stop that pain. And that's the same in a relationship. So the relationship is painful. All you can think is, how can I bring that pain down? How can I get away from the pain? And so it's hard to focus on, what does this mean, on the circles out? And yet it's there. The reality is there.
But the theme that you focus on is personal responsibility. When people come to you and they're having trouble in their marriages, first of all, are most people who are coming to you looking at marriage counseling, or are they looking at they're already separated and now they're having the conversation? At what stage?
Yeah, well, mostly crisis. So when I originally started writing about marriage things, I was wanting to just put a book out for people who wanted to be more happily married. People don't look for help when they're fairly happily married. We're crisis driven as creatures. And so
we're an Ozempic culture. We wait till it's out of control.
When it's hurting, it's time.
Yeah.
And so, I was talking with someone just the other day and they're like, I don't know when to go to the doctor. I'm like, you're already in pain. It's probably a good time. Mm-hmm. But, we don't think about that ahead of time. And so prevention, not high on our reference list. And so most people come in because they are in crisis. And that was true when I was a therapist. They would often drag a spouse into therapy. It's true in coaching. When I'm working with one person who is, whether it's a true crisis or a chronic crisis, like this is a constant state that they've had for years, they feel it's a crisis. And so they're coming to try to figure out what can happen to get them out of the crisis.
So talk to me a little bit about personal responsibility as a theme. Taking personal responsibility is something everybody thinks they do. Everybody will tell you, I always apologize when I do something wrong. We look at our personal responsibility in terms of work, in terms of children, in terms of finances, in terms of weight management, health, smoking. Then there's marriage. And we grew up thinking that marriage was this dance, and that if the other person isn't keeping up their end of the bargain, then you throw your hands up. There's nothing you can do. It's not your fault. And so therefore, if it's not your fault, then that's the conclusion. But that conclusion leads to so many people just sitting in unhappy marriages. How do you get people to understand that personal responsibility is perhaps the only thing they can control in their marriages?
And so you just kind of pointed at it. What can you control? You can't control your spouse. Since we're on the Release podcast, what do you have to release?
Yeah.
Control. You have to release the belief that you can control. There are actually 2 big things I think you have to release, but control is a huge one because people consistently try to control what they can't and fail to control what they can. And so that dichotomy keeps them feeling stuck. So you name the dance. And that's the system's kind of idea of a dance, of a marriage, is that it is a dance going on. And yet people tend to be only pointing at the steps their spouse is dancing and forget that they are choosing their own steps along the way, which is where you have a choice. Maybe I want to change how my steps are. Maybe I want to change how I do those moves that might affect the whole of the marriage. Because if in any dance, if one person changes how they're dancing, the other person has to adjust too. And so if you can do that in some small ways, you can begin to impact what happens in the dance, what happens in the marriage.
But in order to do that, you have to let go of the blame, don't you? Because
So,
we all want the other person to wake up and realize we are fantastic,
oh, sure.
and they should stop doing or start doing what it is we've been complaining about. Isn't that what everybody who comes into couples therapy is asking you? They're saying, Doc, tell him.
That's right. Tell me I'm okay and they're wrong.
Right. So how can you shift into a mindset of personal responsibility? I have to make my changes and then see what happens without letting go of the blame.
Yeah. So blame, and this is a conflation I think a lot of people do, is blame and responsibility being the same thing.
Yes.
And I don't think they are at all the same thing. Blame. So I always kind of picture, if the house is on fire, that one of the most useless things you can do is say, who set this fire? Who can I point to and say, who set this fire? You could say, hey, I'm going to make sure I get out and I get everybody out as safely as possible, that I'm going to take responsibility to get out. Responsibility is forward facing, blame is backward facing. There are times when you have to say, how did I get to here? What do I want to do differently as I move forward? And that's a different piece of looking back and going, look how we got to this place. So here's one of my kind of cornerstone beliefs about what happens in a marriage. You fall in love with this person. You're convinced that the two of you have what it takes to get through the rest of your life together. You have this big celebration that's probably taken a lot of your focus. So the relationship building takes a lot of focus. The wedding takes a lot of focus. And then you have to go back to life, like regular life. And I think people go, and because I've heard people at the end of marriages go, okay, well, now I don't have to worry about whatever. And I'm sitting there going, maybe you need to focus on some of that. You don't have to worry, but let's focus on how you sustain this. And yet life comes along. And so couples come back to life, and it may take them a while. They may be in the honeymoon phase for a while, but at some point something is getting their attention. Like, okay, now we've got to parent the kids. So we're going to be parents, or I need to get this far into my career, and then we'll get back to us. There's something that we'll get back to us. And so they hit what I call hit the pause button. I don't think it's a choice. I don't think it's conscious, but they do it anyway. They're unconsciously hitting the pause going, we'll get back to us. And there's this kind of belief that it's like putting the marriage on suspended animation, like they do with the space travelers who are going to the other planet. You just put them to sleep for 300 years and they'll get there and you wake them up and they're just right back to where they were.
They were.
But it doesn't happen in relationships. They're either growing and expanding or they're shrinking and dying. And so you hit the pause button because life is coming at you and you disconnect from the spouse or start disconnecting. And the connection is the lifeblood of the relationship, which is, so to circle back around, you talked about communication. That is one of the defaults I see in therapy. We need to give you some communication skills. We need to, and I know because I would sit there and people would come in and say, teach us to communicate better. I would sit there for 30, 40 minutes listening to them going, I've understood everything you're saying. It's not a communication problem. It's what you're communicating to each other that's a problem, and it's coming through the disconnection.
Right.
And
It's a connection
disconnection is
problem.
painful.
Yeah. It's a connection problem because people are not trying to do what they did in the beginning. In the beginning when you're courting someone, right?
It's easy.
It's easy because you're interested in their perspective. You're interested in their perspective because you get something out of it.
Yeah.
Right? They have a crush on you. You have a crush on them. You want more of that focus to stay on you. And because you want that focus to stay on you, whatever they're telling you about what they feel seems important, and you are assimilating that information, and it's affecting how you behave around them and how you treat them, which then reinforces to them the idea that you get them. But it wasn't magic. It was effort.
Right. Effort that was, so there's an adrenaline surge that comes in there. That's what leads to that. I feel the need to put in this effort because I want to hold on to this person. Adrenaline always has a little fear to it. And
Yeah.
when we get an adrenaline kick, it's because something scares us. And so if I'm going, wow, this person is so much of what I want in life, and I'm afraid I might lose this person. And so the
Right.
adrenaline is flowing and we're doing everything we can, which is where our brain kind of becomes the obsessive piece. And so while it's effort, we don't really register the effort. It's just like, I've got to have this person in my life and I want more energy. So adrenaline only lasts for so long. That's the whole kind of infatuation, in love kind of thing. That can only take you so far. And then the brain has to go, oh, wait, I can't do this forever. It fries the brain system. So our brain goes back to a more normal state where it goes from adrenaline to endorphins. Now, the way you release endorphins is by doing something, not by this fear base, but by action. So if I do loving actions, it activates the endorphins and connection with this other person. But that does take conscious choice, not necessarily more effort. In fact, the effort's the same on either side, the energy invested on either side, but it is action. I've got to do loving actions in order to keep that connection going. And that's where people have hit the pause button without realizing that cascade that's already happening, and then the disconnection begins.
Well, and it's funny because you're saying you start dating someone and then your fear is that this person's going to leave. Well, fast forward 10 years and your fear is that the person you're dealing with now is never going to leave.
That's right.
So now it's 10 years later and you're in Lee's office and you're complaining and you're saying, she's the worst or he's the worst. And you got to help me. And then at some point, Lee says to you, I can see what you don't like about your partner, what your partner doesn't like about you. I can see your unhealthy patterns. I am recommending that you focus on personal responsibility. And then the person says, yeah, but I can't. Nothing's changing. Nothing's changing. What's the point? What is the template that you're recommending to people? So I'm thinking of one friend in particular who's separated right now, and they're not really doing anything in the separation. They're just kind of living parallel lives and taking care of the kids, but nobody's discussing anything. And what I'm suggesting is that there is work that must be done on yourself in midlife regardless. Whether you stay married or whether you get divorced, this is the time you got to look in the mirror and figure some stuff. When you look at all these books that say you can only change your own behavior, but you're counseling someone to stay in a marriage that's unsatisfied, that's unsatisfying, what exactly are you suggesting they change? Are you suggesting the small actions without lecturing? What are you suggesting that they do?
Hopefully I don't lecture because that really helps.
They don't lecture their partner.
Yes. So that's when they're stepping into I got to get them to change. And so part of what I see is I change for two reasons. So let's go back to kind of what I call my 3 C's of what you need to work on. The 3 C's are to connect, to change, and create. So connecting with your spouse. And that means bringing back the connection you've lost along the way. There are some dangers to that. You've got to find kind of that middle lane where you've been doing too little connection. The danger is jumping over and doing too much connection, and suddenly you're chasing your spouse. And when you chase somebody, they run. I call it the chaser spacer thing, and you've got to learn to pace, to be the pacer in this process. And so you're working to build the connection that the relationship can handle for where it is now. So connect. Let me go through these 3 and then we can come back around and push on it a little bit. So the second one is to change. And that's change yourself. And so usually when I say that, people say, so you think something's wrong with me? No, but I do know this about humans. We get to a certain point in life and we kind of lock down. That's why you have people who are complaining about that crazy new music. They don't want to try new food. They don't want to go to new places. They want their thing. I had a person who came to me, it's been a while now, and he said, my wife says I've changed and I need you to tell her I haven't changed. And I'm like, if you didn't change, you've lost your opportunities of growing, because that is part of life, to be able to change. And so part of that is to start that process of expanding yourself, of becoming more of who you need to be and who you could be. So that's an important part, really, regardless of what happens to the relationship. That's what you've been talking about. But you put that in tandem with the connecting. And the last one is creating. So I have a core belief that marriages that work have formed a sense of we. We are in this together. It's not losing yourself. We just talked about how important it is to be your best self. But you see yourself as in this new entity. We are in this together. We're a team. So I like the analogy of like a sports team in this, because if you're on a sports team, you have a goal. And the goal is not to defeat your teammates. The goal is not to fight with your teammates. The goal is to win the game. And so you start thinking differently than what I watch when people don't have that sense of being a we and they go to you, me. They've stayed in that we're individuals, and then they become you versus me. And so part of what they need to shift is becoming a team. So how do they think about money? How do they think about parenting? How do they think about being part of extended families, of each other's extended families? All of those are ways of we think about we. Or we stay with the you, me, which is your money, my money. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me how to parent. It's not a tell you what to do. It's how can we think about this as our process to move forward in life.
So let's say that's the mental shift someone's able to make, and they say, okay, I'm going to approach it this way. I'm going to say, honey, sweetheart, schnookums, let's reframe. We're trying to find our way to connection, and I think to save our marriage, we should be talking about we. So can we outline 5 areas and say, what are your thoughts on how we should parent? What are your thoughts on how we should spend? What are your thoughts about how often we should be spending time one-on-one with each other? And then that client goes and does all that, and then they're not getting the response from the other person. What do you recommend?
Well, I wouldn't have recommended that at all.
Okay, so then I'm wrong. What would you recommend?
So there is the mindset shift, but it's not to take that immediately to a spouse. Here's what I see many times. So I'd say that to somebody and go, that's exactly what I want. And what they want to do is go proclaim that to a spouse, but the spouse isn't at that place right now. The relationship can't hold that level of connection at this point. So we got to rebuild, and we got to rebuild the connection, maybe not quite from the ground up, because we've got some history and the fact that they, are still have some shared things. I mean, no matter how you do it, if you're in the same household, the money is still flowing and has to be treated in some way as our resource. So there's some fine tuning that can go into that. But it starts with yourself to ask the question, where am I not thinking of we? How do I assume, the place where it's you versus me or yours, mine, and where am I doing that? That's a piece. The other is, I think there is something, research will back me on this. I've been saying this now for 25 years. And about 15 years ago, research came out that couples who do well use pronouns that are plural, us, we, our, in language. And so they were going, well, and I think it's a both way. They were going, well, then you should start speaking that. I'm like, yeah, but it's also the way they already represent it. So that's why they're doing well. They already think of it that way. Our language, though, forms our belief systems. So if you start talking about we, us, our, and you don't have to, make sure your spouse hears you say we, us, our, but you just use it in common language, you're bringing that sense of us into the conversation, and that changes how you think about things. It can also, in some ways, infect. So it's kind of like the memes that we talked about long before the internet world, but the memes that infect our thought process get in there and can begin to broaden our idea and understanding of what the relationship is like and infect our spouse too.
So let's say you have a client comes to you and they're doing this and they're saying, I've tried working with my partner, it's not working. I'm not ready to leave. I want to rebuild. I'm going to do the steps. I'm going to do my own audit of where I'm thinking about me rather than we. And then they come back to you with all this evidence of things they've done. At what point do you feel it's time to call it? Maybe it's not toxic. Maybe it's not violent. Maybe it's not all those things, right? Maybe it's a marriage you thought was worth saving.
Yeah.
At what point do you say, oh, you're not getting anything out of this?
Yeah. So I will listen to them and have a conversation with them about that. It's just not for me to call that.
In your mind, I should have said. In your mind.
In
not
my mind.
To them.
So I would still say I stay fairly open-minded. Here's why. Okay. Over the years, I've seen 2 groups that sadden me. One is those who very quickly are like, I'm done. It's been a week, and I'm done with this.
Well, that means they were out the door anyway.
They were out the door. They're easily discouraged by not seeing exactly what they want. And all I can say is, okay, I mean, wish you the best. And then I see people who, in spite of all of the evidence, continue year after year after year. And they're the ones that I often will finally say, hey, how much do you really have in you? How much fight do you have? And some of them will honestly say, I'm not stopping this. I made a commitment. I am in it for good. I'm not stopping it. Now, when it goes that long, that's when I call that the chronic crisis. I mean, they're just stuck in this pattern. Nothing's going to happen. And as long as they want to do it, I can't say don't do it. I could say, notice how long this has been going on. Notice all the energy you're putting into this. Are you sure you want to continue? And I'll ask them the simple question, is the only thing keeping you in this fear? And if so, that's not going to do it. If you have an aspiration of, for instance, I've had people say, look, my parents, my grandparents, everybody in my family is divorced. I'm not doing that. That's a big why. I mean, that is their why, and it hasn't changed at that point. So we can retrench, replan, and keep working at it. And I'll recognize that at some point they're going to come to some crossroad for some reason. Usually in those cases, it's because the spouse finally goes, I'm out.
It's interesting because I also think of it just in terms of what was the goal in the first place, right? We were just like young people running around, going dancing, meeting nice people, and taking their phone numbers back when you wrote down phone numbers.
Yeah.
And, going out on dates, and then eventually musical chairs, you fell in love with someone. But the goal was always to be kind of at peace and happy-go-lucky in your life. That was what it was for everyone. We were born that way. That's our setting. Then we get married, and when things start to go a little bit sideways, then we think the goal is to get this person to change because then I can be happy. At some point, people reach this fork in the road. And like I said, being divorced, people keep talking to me about their marriages and they tell me all sorts of things. And if I go through with these friends, okay, if you're never going to leave, you've made that decision, then I say, isn't the goal then to have the best possible life?
Yeah.
And if that is what works for them, when I say, if you're never going to leave, then we're not having that conversation. And if you think he's or she's never going to change, then we're really not having that conversation either. So the only thing I can tell you, the benefit of being your divorced friend, is to say, divorce doesn't immediately make you happy. It makes you really happy for about 6 months, but it doesn't immediately make you happy because you are still you. And so if you are going to leave him or her, you don't get to automatically be happy the next day because you're going to have to change some things about yourself anyway, because there are patterns and beliefs and just the way you walk through the world. Picture what you would do differently if you were single and start doing that now, right? They're not actually stopping you.
Yeah.
And then if you can get happier, maybe the side effect of that is they will start to be nicer because they'll feel your energy. I mean, is that kind of where you go in terms of personal responsibility with people?
You did put in an interesting framing. I think you're right that people are well served to say, what can I do given the circumstances? What can I do? That is the growth mindset question. Given where we are, what can I do to bring meaning, purpose, happiness, satisfaction, joy, thriving into my own life? That is the kind of the growth mindset question. But you talked about the if then. And I think that is an important one. So the if then that you noticed is, if they change, I'll be happy. And that's a false equation always. If then in terms of anything outside of my perspective and my control, if I put it that way, I've locked myself down. So if my spouse does X, Y, and Z, I'll finally be happy is a stuck point. That is a challenge point for me to say, what can you do that is outside of the if then that brings it back to your choice on how you want to be in the relationship? I have plenty of people who do have to maybe broaden their perspective. So here's another thing I've realized, and back to that, hit your thumb, and the whole world is that thumb. Marriage crisis, and the whole world is that marriage crisis. And so they become monofocused. All they can think about and talk about and share about is the marriage, the hurt, the spouse, the behavior, everything else. And they start pulling in, instead of going, who do I need to be in the world? What do I want to do? What are the experiences that are important to me? So I had a person who came and said, I want to travel the world. My spouse doesn't, so I'm going to be miserable. If your spouse doesn't want to travel and you want to see the world, you can still travel. But you're making it so focused on the if then, this has to happen before I can get there, that they're closing off their perspectives. Now, that is a thing that I always point to somebody when a spouse is saying, you may not. And I'm not talking about like inappropriate relationships, but you may no longer go play your tennis. You may no longer be with your friends. That's a red flag.
That's different. Yes. That's like,
that's a
there
whole,
is no marriage.
Now we're at the toxic point.
Yeah. And that's where I draw the line, where I'm just basically like, if your spouse is difficult, guess what? You're super annoying too. Just gonna break it to you. Like everybody's their own special brand of super
Yeah.
annoying. My question is always, do you have a marriage? And if you have a marriage, then I'm sorry to break it to you, but you're gonna have to work on your marriage. Right? So give me some scenarios of people who come in to work with you where you are able to help them see what personal responsibility means in making themselves happier in their marriage.
Mhm.
Not fixing the marriage is about personal responsibility, because no matter how much you fix your behavior, you may not be able to save your marriage.
Mhm.
It's so important to say that to people in that context. And I have parents who've been happily married for 50 years too, right? And not perfect, but happy. So I get it. I've seen them ups and downs and this and that. But assuming that someone wants to be happy, what are the scenarios you can share with me? What are the turning points that you've seen?
Yeah. So let's recount some of this. So if we go back and I tell them my whole theory of the pause button and I ask the question, when did that happen? They suddenly have to come into the fact that they were part of that process. So now we've already brought in if you're part of that process, how do you want to change that going forward? No need to spend too much time self-flagellation back there for what happened. It happened. That's what happens. So I normalize that. And now how do we want to move forward? How do you want to start reconnecting?
And the key is, when did we pause? Not when did he pause?
That's right. Yeah,
Right.
because it takes two for that to happen. And it generally and so what happens though is we're aware of our spouse pausing. And then when we look back and go, oh yeah, I did that too. So what happens when you think a spouse paused is you feel hurt. I'm rejected. They're rejecting me, not we stop the connection. That's a different piece. We try to go back to life as we thought we had to do with the kids, with the job, with the whatever. And so now we can normalize that and go, okay, we made that mistake. Now, how do I want to work on connecting? So then we work on the ways to gently connect, to do invitational connection, not forced connection. Forced connection looks like we're going to do date night. We're going to go on these big romantic trips. We're going to
What is invitational connection? I've never heard that.
So I'll give you a small example. Well, let's start with John Gottman talks about bids. And bids are always invitations to connection. And so that would be a small way, but let's talk about kind of a practical one. So I talk about tag-alongs. Hey, I'm going to go grab a cup of coffee. Would you like to go with me? That's invitational. And if you say, you know what, I'm busy right now, I'll go, okay, I'll see, I'm going to go grab a cup of coffee. So it's not at 11 a.m. next Wednesday, let's go do coffee. That feels very forced, and they feel like they're cornered. But invitational, I'm going to go do this. Love to have you tag along. If not, that's okay. And so then they feel free to accept or decline. Now, if somebody says to me, hey, I'm going to go grab a cup of coffee, would you like to go with me? I would go, well, that's nice. They want me to go. Even if I go, no, I'm not going to do that. But that's a nice thing for them to do. I don't feel forced. And if I go along, then can we not get into, I talk about the relationship talk. And that is the temptation. People have this script in their head where they become the debate performers, where they have, if I do my bullet points, this person is going to go, you're so right. Let's work on this. And the problem is we have two people with two different scripts in their mind who are now going to go after each other. Like you have actors on a stage both reading from different scripts and you're going, this doesn't even make sense anymore, but you're staying on your script. So the relationship talk is a forced way of trying to convince. I will say to anybody, if you hear yourself saying, how can I make calls or force my spouse to connect with me, you're on the wrong path. Right. How can I invite the invitation? How can I show that I am caring without it feeling like pressure? So small things like, can you give me a hug is different than saying, hey, would you mind if I hugged you? Just a slight difference. Or I love you with a question at the end instead of just want to let you know I love for you. Those are different small things that are just invitational. And John Gottman's thing about bids fits here, that there are actually 3 responses to any bid. And sometimes we miss the bids coming our way. You can turn toward someone. So if my wife goes, oh, look at that beautiful sunset, I could say, that is beautiful. We've connected over that. Or I could just keep going on my phone. Or I could say, how dare you say that to me? I am busy over here. That's turning against.
Yeah.
And so making the little bids there and not getting called up if they turn away or turn against. So if I say, hey, want to grab a cup of coffee, and you say, no, thank you, to go, I mean, that's okay. I've still extended invitation. There's still a bit of connection even in that.
Right.
And so it's,
Well, and also what's under it is I'm still doing something I want to do, so I still get my pumpkin spice latte
that's
because
right.
we're back to making your own life better. And if you want the latte, go have the latte.
Yeah. I'm going to go walk the dogs. Would you like to go with me? I'm still going to get my walk in. I'm going to spend
Right.
time with my dogs, if nothing else.
Right. I like the weather. I like the
Yeah.
leaves. Go
And
see
if
the
you
leaves.
go along to have a light, gentle conversation where it doesn't become, let's talk about our relationship. My thing is we can either talk about our relationship or we can relate. That's the breakdown when you're at that stage. Is there a point when you have to talk about the relationship? Yes. It's just not in the midst of the early stages of trying to reconnect. That's too heavy.
So, two thoughts in my head at this moment. One is, I always knew there was this part where you get into the real marriage, the meat of the marriage, the part where you start being spouses, right? Working on it. I always thought that was supposed to happen in year 3, where you did that work. I think it's much, much tougher for people at year 12. And I think we're reaching a society where it's more often in year 12 because women are working, because there's so much else that keeps life busy. Like prior generations didn't have that, so maybe they hit this moment sooner. But now life is so busy that you can go on autopilot for a decade. And then all of a sudden, wait a minute, I haven't touched my spouse in a year.
Yeah.
Something's horribly wrong. And then, and he resents me and I resent him and whatever, all this kind of stuff. Okay, well, that's the first thing I was thinking. And the second thing I was thinking was, man, it sounds like a lot of work. I'm not so sure I want to get remarried. But I do. But also you're reminding me that it's work and that everybody's annoying.
Let's
So
call
you
it
should have
effort.
to do your favor.
Let's call it
Yeah.
effort because, so here's one of the things I often have people say to me, if it was meant to be, it shouldn't be this hard.
Oh, I don't agree with that.
And I'm like, where do you apply that in life? Like,
Yeah.
if my bicep was meant to be big, it would just be big. I wouldn't have to go exercise it. That's
If I was meant to be skinny, I would just be skinny.
That's right. That's effort. And so the effort we decide to put in is, so I play pickleball and I could say, well, if I'm meant to be a 4-0 pickleball player, it would just be there instead of going, no, I've got to go do the reps. I've got to go put in the play. I've got to go put in the effort to get there. And yet in marriage, we're like, either it is or it's not. Love should just be there. And so the effort is what I would say it is instead of it's work. There is effort, but anything that's important is effort.
True, but I will take your analogy and I will take it to a ridiculous point, which is to say the pickleball paddle never hurt your feelings or ignored your birthday. So I'm just going to put that in there, right?
Well,
effort, yes, but we keep making effort in things that are not emotionally charged.
Okay,
We
that
plan
said,
up.
I watch people on the pickleball court take it very personally. that team was, trying to beat me. I'm like, of course, that was the game. I mean, that is the nature of that. My partner was trying to play poorly, and I'm sitting there watching it going, no, your partner just had some deficits and y'all didn't work well together. And so there is the place to ask the question, am I personalizing this in ways that are not true?
Okay, so let's go back to the person who's working on invitational. So there's 2 steps, right? First step is figure out your part in the we when we paused. Second step is work on invitational connection, not forced connection. Where do people go wrong when asking for invitational connection? And 2, what's the next step?
So, let's go do the first and then it'll lead to the second anyway, right? So I said there are 2 things that you have to drop, you have to release. And one is control, that you don't have control over your spouse. And the other is expectations. I believe that a lot of our problems in life and certainly in our marriages are based in what expectations we're carrying with us that are either intrinsic, like I just carry them around, I don't even realize it, or extrinsic, like I'm demanding, like I expect you to do this, but the other person hasn't agreed to it. And both of those get us into trouble in this area because we have created an expectation of, for instance, an expectation of what the marriage is going to be that is usually misplaced. Then when a marriage is in crisis, we have expectations about how it's going to turn around and how this spouse is going to suddenly go, oh, you're so right, I'm so wrong, let me move towards you. So that gets us in trouble. So that's a backdrop, and we can come back to that. But here's the bigger thing I see is that same thing we've been talking about personalization. So we have a dog, my son, who's visiting right now has a dog too. His dog was a rescue. Our dog was not. And she has been spoiled rotten all her life, expects that everybody's going to love on her. And so you reach over and she's like, yep, give me a rub. His dog was a rescue who lived on the streets at the beach for some time until he adopted him. When you reach to him, he's not so trusting. And so he'll sometimes react. Now, if I had the expectation that this dog was just going to roll over and the dog reacts to me, I could take it personally, or I could go, well, that's the dog. His dog is reacting. And so one of the things that I work on is having people not get in a reactive space with their spouse, to be able to learn some self-management, to realize that there are patterns now in place between you. And those patterns aren't going to change instantly. You're not going to suddenly roll over for each other for a back rub or a tummy rub. You're going to be more reactive to each other, and back to control. The only thing you can control is how responsive or reactive you're going to be. And so when I have people in my office, I can sit there and watch them go. So, story. Years ago, I had this couple in my office, and they were talking about, they're doing fine, and then everything explodes. And I said, well, give me an example. How does that happen? And they looked over at each other, and she looks at me and she says, lawnmower. And I mean, it was like I could watch it go from 0 to 75 or 80 in like lawnmower. Okay. And they suddenly started fighting about the lawnmower. And I was like, wait, lawnmower. And basically, she was the one who mowed the grass. He gave his opinion about what lawnmower to buy. She asked her father and bought the one her father recommended, not the one he recommended. That was it. But that same scenario played out over and over in their relationship. And so they instantly went to reaction mode. So it took
because
us
the pattern was not resolved.
It never got resolved. Same exact fight over and over, which is typical. And so when they escalated that point, neither one was self-regulating. And the thing is, when one person self-regulates, it keeps the temperature from boiling over. I've got a buddy who's a therapist and has people in his office, and he sticks on the pulsometers to people's fingers.
That's smart.
And it goes off when they cross 100 beats per minute, it goes off. And so he'll sit there and watch. And so even if one of them has a poker face, it gives them objective information that they have now escalated. They've gone into what the scientists would call arousal mode. And they are now in fight flight.
Yeah.
So then he can say, okay, let's chill for a minute and teach them self-regulation. I often do that with the one person of how do you regulate through breathing, through centering, through just being more present to that and not personalizing it. So if we can work on those skills, then when the temperature goes up, they don't have to follow it up. They can keep it lower, and then that usually de-escalates the whole thing because they're suddenly not feeding that cycle. They're not feeding the system in the same way. They're changing the steps to the dance.
But it's always part of a pattern. The reason why it escalates the blood pressure is because lawnmower is a proxy for how he feels that she dismisses his input.
Exactly.
Or picks her family over him. Like for me, it would have been slideshow. Every marriage has their lawnmower. Yep. And for me, it would have been slideshow, but that's a proxy for you don't take accountability, you hide, right?
Right.
So whatever it is, so step one, right? What was my point in the we when we paused? Step two, figure out how to make invitational bids for connection. And then step three is find your lawnmower and figure out how to de-escalate your blood pressure when those things pop up.
And
what's your lawnmower?
To recognize, okay, so he finally was like, y'all fix that. And I mean, she was the one who dragged him in. So I knew that was where we were headed. So in that case, we spent some time with her coming to terms with what that meant to him. Whether she agreed with his conclusion or not, she needed to understand how he'd made meaning of that story and how she played into that, what her role into that. So it wasn't just that one time. And as we started talking about it, she went, oh gosh, I do this all the time to him.
It's a pattern. It's always a proxy for it.
And he has his pattern too, right? I mean, he takes that and runs with it. And so there was a piece of that was important for her to be able to go, I can change how I step into the decision making, how we interact as a team, because that was what he felt. If you boil it all down, he went, I thought we were in this together. Yes, you were going to make that decision, but you tossed me aside for Dad. And so the you tossed me aside for X was important for her to come to terms with and recognize that in that scenario, he desperately wanted to be part of the team together, for them together to make that decision. And she had missed that. She just took it personally.
And it's clear that that's hurting the marriage, right? The point is not about who's at fault or that he shouldn't see it that way or that she shouldn't listen to her dad. Maybe your dad knows a lot about lawnmowers. That's not the point. It's about the impact of that dance, that repeated pattern on the marriage.
Exactly.
Right? So let's, in the interest of, there are patterns that get repeated in co-parenting that come out of your marriage. At that point, all that matters is how anything affects the kids. What patterns do you think people who are divorcing and going to have to start co-parenting need to be most focused on breaking?
So number one is they're going to have, they either find a way of forgiving each other for where they've been, or they start taking it out through the parenting. It's going to be one or the other. They have to find a way of resolving. And when I say forgive, some of that is letting go. It's a broader context of, I'm going to forgive what feels like hurt and let go of what is the patterns. So I wrote a book on forgiving because many people are like, they haven't apologized. Doesn't matter. It doesn't require that for you to forgive. And part of forgiving is letting go of all of the stuff, not saying it never happened, not saying it didn't hurt, but to recognize that when you choose not to forgive, you're letting that person continue to control your emotions, your emotional state. And so coming to terms with that is important. It doesn't let them off the hook. There are still some things you may have to resolve, especially if part of what you're holding on to is around the parenting thing. One is to get to the place where you can resolve that, forgive, let go, release. The second is, can you ask the question, what do we want for the kids and what is in their best interest moving forward? How do we want them to develop as humans together? And that's a conversation. That's just not a thought internally, but where do we want them to be? How do we want them to feel? I think number three is for the kids to be reassured over and over, this had nothing to do with them. This was a parental decision. Kids didn't cause it. Kids aren't responsible for it. And that the love continues for both parents to that child. Now, obviously there are always going to be exceptions, and somebody's going to say, well, I've got this spouse who, but I'm sticking with the mainstream, typical kind of thing that both parents really do care for the best for their kids. They really want to find a way forward. Then the question is, how can we as parents get out of our own way of each other to have the best result?
Two things come to mind. One is I did a podcast about a year ago with a gentleman who was the director of the Stanford Center for Forgiveness. And the quote that sticks out in my mind was he said, unforgiveness is holding on to making reality wrong, which makes it all about you, which was really powerful, right? The other thing I think of is people don't know what forgiveness really looks like until they have to try to forgive somebody for everything that happened in the past while that person still keeps trespassing against you. Welcome to co-parenting. And so I will say this, the best piece of advice I think anybody can get when they're considering divorce is if you think you can control this other person's behavior, wait till you're divorced. Then you will really learn how much you cannot control anybody's behavior. So maybe give it a shot now and maybe call up Lee.
I had someone who's like, I cannot no longer be married to this person. I can't stand how they're parenting, when they're in the household. And I'm like, okay, what are you going to do when they're parenting all the time and you're not there? You need to resolve that now. And it never had occurred to them that there was going to be another layer.
It's going to get a whole lot worse before it gets better. But when you need a divorce, you need a divorce.